Y'all.
Imani, welcome to New Orleans. How you doing tonight?
I'm good now. I'm so delighted to be here.
Well, y'all are excited to be here, right? So I've had the great pleasure of reading this book so closely. And I mean, not to put too fine of a point on it, but this is a work of genius. As a writer, when you read something, you try and figure out how did the author do what they did. And then when it's Imani Perry, you can't figure it out. So I'm just going to ask you this. When you were writing this book, did you see this as an act of jazz, like improvisation? Because it's
Yes,
very associative from place to place to place.
absolutely. Yeah. So, first of all, let me just say I am so delighted to be at Baldwin and also to be in conversation with you. I adore your work. I admire it so deeply, and it's an honor to be in conversation. And I love what DJ has done in creating this institution. And I also love New Orleans. So yes, there is this essay that Albert Murray, jazz critic and novelist, wrote about Romare Bearden, the visual artist. And it's called Bearden Plays Bearden. And in it, he talks about how, Bearden did collages and painted as well. And he talks about you see the picture when you see Bearden's work, but what you don't necessarily see is that he approaches putting the pieces together like a jazz musician. And so when I read this essay, I was like, this is exactly what I have been trying to do and figure out. And just as another example, I was once up for this fellowship and they asked me who was the writer who most influenced me. And I said Thelonious Monk. And they were like, what is she talking about? And they were like, but you mean a writer? And I said, yes, he's a writer, right? A composer. So absolutely the composition piece, because rhythm matters. It's like the bits and pieces of stories through history and anecdotes, but there's also the matter of pacing and imagery. And it's deeply jazz influenced.
You've been interviewed extensively. I mean, you were in the New York Times a few days ago. You've traveled the world, been interviewed. So part of my job is to try and not ask the exact same questions you've had 25 times in the past month. But I know, for example, well, I believe that part of your brilliance is that your influences are not the standard influences. So you just mentioned Romare Bearden, for example. But tell us about the influence of Daughters of the Dust on your work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that film. And so I was telling Maurice, I used to watch that every week when I was in graduate school. I watched Daughters of the Dust over and over again. Um, and it was, one, what Julie Dash did in the film is she created a new language of filmmaking in that she said she made a choice. It's a narrative, but I don't have to use the conventional narrative cues. I don't have to explain everything. Things like color and gesture and waves and movement, all of these things that can be part of the storytelling. And I don't have to unpack it all for you. And it was so breathtaking to me. And I remember and this was before being graduate, when I was like 19 years old, she did a screening at my college and I walked up, I waited in line and I said, I want to do what you do. And she said, well, she's like, filmmaking is hard for Black women. I was like, I don't want to be a filmmaker, but I want to, she looked at me like, what is this little girl talking about? But what I was trying to say is I wanted to find a way to access the past using the symbols, and the multi-sensory, all this multi-sensory work that was connected to Black Southern tradition to tell stories. Yeah. And so I'm trying to get there.
I think you got there, Doc. I think you actually got there. Let's back up for a second. How many of y'all read South to America? By show of hands. Quite a few people read it. Okay, so, that's such a brilliant book. You're on a journey in that book. That book was so successful. Of course, it won the National Book Award, kind of a big deal. Got the Genius Grant after that, the MacArthur Genius Grant. I'm just curious. Tell me about the conception of making that book and your personal journey of the research and actually writing that book. I've been very curious about it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it was different from this book. So with that one, it was really directly influenced by another Albert Murray book, which was South to a Very Old Place, 1973. And Hip was in the midst of this period where they were talking about the New South. And so Murray, who's also from a native of Alabama, traveled through the South telling stories. And he did some unconventional things with it. But one of the things that the review that Toni Morrison did of that book, she said, yeah, Murray is brilliant, but she said he doesn't understand the relationship to Africa of the Black South. And she said he could have gone places much souther, which is part of why I have the Caribbean pieces in that book. But there's a little bit of a kind of like, it's not a trick, but it was, people like books a lot about traveling through the South. Like there's one almost every year, and they tend to be successful. So I knew that if I did this book in a way that I moved through places, that would be a hook for lots of people. But it was really trying to figure out how to tell a story that pushed against the misconceptions, but also acknowledged the deep and complicated landscape of Southern living. And so to do that, I was like, I'm going to go have these encounters that I know are going to be really interesting and rich, and then dig underneath the ground where the encounters were. Right. And the difference is this book is not encounters with other human beings as much as encounters with artifacts. And so I had to sort of figure out how to do different work with them, because I didn't have the voices of other people in the same way. So I had to have the conversation with like objects, with flowers and plates and yeah. Did I answer your question?
You did answer it. And I was thinking about, like, there's the objects in here, but you do give us a few moments of people you really love. So for example, Hugh Hill and Ruth Hill.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about them?
Yeah.
Brother Blue.
So there was this man who, when we moved up north to Massachusetts, my mother went to graduate school, and there we met this man named Brother Blue, and he would stand on corners or on a hill. His real name was Hugh Hill, and he would tell stories. Black man from Cleveland. He wore a all blue uniform. He wore a blue button-down shirt, jeans, and he wore a blue tam, and he often had butterflies all over his clothing, and sometimes had streamers coming off his clothes. And he was this beloved storyteller. Like, after he passed, it was remarkable. This is Cambridge, Massachusetts, so there are a lot of like Nobel laureates and things. So everybody admired him, right? And they talked about how extraordinary he was. And he would tell like a jazz version of King Lear. He would tell stories about the coming of butterfly, just these brilliant, beautiful stories. So my friend, Farrah Griffin, said to me one day, she was like, Brother Blue, she said, go look for him in the Harvard yearbook. And I was like, Harvard yearbook? She said, yeah, you went to Harvard. Go look for him in Harvard yearbook. And I was like, okay. Because he's a kind of, he's an unusual, he's like a black hippie on the street. And he's in the yearbook looking like Du Bois. Like, this is like the tie and the close cut and like a race man. And then so that led me to sort of being interested in his story. And he had this remarkable personal story. And, he was an officer in World War II, had gone to Harvard undergrad, went to Yale, and then back to Harvard again, and had this career that was preparing him to be that kind of like classic civil rights iconic figure. And he decided he wanted to be a storyteller instead on the streets. And was a brilliant storyteller. And his wife, who wore blue too, but she wore a darker shade of blue. They were so sweet with each other. And when I was a kid, I used to love to see them together. So I would like follow behind them because they were always flirting and, sweet. And she was very quiet. So all attention would be directed towards him. What I found out later is that she's the person who created the Black Women's Oral History Project at Harvard University. She was an archivist. And so the collections that are there now, June Jordan, Angela Davis, all of those are actually due to the work that she did. So I was like, oh, right. So I started thinking about it, the storyteller and the keeper of stories together. That's what their relationship was. And so there's this one person who you see out front, but then the person behind who was tending to the stories is just as important. And their marriage was beautiful on its own terms, but it symbolized something about what it means to hold tradition that's really powerful.
They loved each other so much.
They loved each other so much.
You described them like holding hands. He sort of reaches out to her and she smiles at him.
He was always winking at her when he was, and he used to tell stories on a hill right outside her office, which I didn't realize at the time. That it was just, beautiful. So romantic. Brother Blue.
So y'all may have noticed we're living in an interesting time right now. They are deporting people. They are firing the people that look at the government and make sure that we're doing the right thing. They cut off aid to Africa. They are attacking trans people. You just name somebody, they're attacking them. That's happening all over the place right now. This is almost like this is kind of cheesy. This is my generation. It's almost like in the second old Star Wars film when the Empire is striking back. Like they got Han Solo like frozen in the big block of metal and, Luke running for his life. And yet, in this book, you make these associations that it's almost hard for me to even describe. One of the associations you do is the idea of the blue note. This idea of in music, this response to the difficulty of the world. And you even say at one point, there's so many quotes here, I can't keep up. Is there a notation devised yet that can tie the thread together? I haven't seen it. The closest we get to explaining it is the deed itself. Hence the rhythmic quip. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. So when I ask you, like, what should we be doing right now is people in this world where things are just kind of literally on fire, or like in a snow apocalypse, what do we do for ourselves and our loved ones?
It's hard. I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I think at the very least, we have to move. We cannot, it's hard, but we cannot be moved about by the hysteria of the moment. So and there's a lot of terrible that's going on, but we are being socialized into a state of hyper arousal and fear that I think can make us feel incompetent. And so I am in part trying to discipline myself, what I consume, what I take in, so that I can imagine. I do think there's a lot that there's a lesson, I forgot how to say this. There's some ancestral lessons. And I don't mean that we repeat the same things that ancestors did, but there's something extraordinary that had to happen in people's imagination, human imagination, to move us from slavery to freedom, right? And I think about that moment, I taught a course with the visual artist Mario Moore that we call Visualizing the Battle Cry several years ago, where we were imagining, so we all know the rebel yell, right? We're familiar with that sound.